Hi, welcome to another video on the channel Behind Closed Doors. I hope you're doing okay. If this is your first time, my name is Ryan, CC-Okeke. I have myoclonus dystonia, just a whole bunch of stuff, Yeah, I'm feeling really crappy. I just had a refill on my meds. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna try and wrap up. I hope I'm able to because it's long. So if this is your first time, I would ask that you please subscribe, like, and share. The funny thing is conception. Yesterday I spoke with a very good friend. A couple. I spoke with both of them, and I told her, I said, I have a YouTube channel going on, subscribe. And she said, doesn't it take money? So for now, it's free, but I believe it's gonna get to a point where there's gonna be a subscription fee. So for now, it's free. Just subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything. Like and then share, and then for those who have subscribed already, I want to thank you for being with me. And for the support. It's people like you that keep me going. You know, yeah. So, back to the first relationship. How it crumbled. I kind of stayed in that toxic environment because I wanted my kid to get out of school. I mean, this was summer, so I needed to get out of school. Because kids are not supposed to be involved in all this. Toxicity, especially between parents and or partners. And so I waited. I had to wait for her to get out of school, and then I moved her out, and then I moved out of the house, out of the apartment, and I was staying in a hotel. But the funny thing was, my kid wouldn't sleep until she saw me, and so I was having to do. This has been years, but I had to do for 5 minute drive every morning, and at the end of work because she wouldn't sleep until she saw me. And this went on for like 2 weeks. So it was really stressful. And so, getting the all clear from the HIV was a miracle. It was just another sign showing me that, letting me know that, regardless of how messed up we are, God alone can turn around those messes into blessings. Out of that toxic union has just a wonderful young lady has been birthed, and she's trying to find her path in life, and can't be any prouder of her or her brother. I just spoke with her brother. I spoke with my son now. He's in school, and he's just a lovely thing, that's a lovely person. It breaks my heart that he has to be in the middle of all this. Yeah, but let me stick with the first one. Let me try and wrap it up. And so, so I moved out of the apartment, and I told my parents, and as is the culture, the tradition. My dad had reached out. First of all, I had to we had to have a family meeting in my house, and that's where I told them, what was going on, because like I said, I'm an ambivert, but I usually keep things very private. And then after I told him, he was like, "No, that's my dad." He was like, "No, no, this is just wrong." And so he reached out to her parents, her folks, and said, yeah, we need to have a sit down, because this is not working, and apparently she doesn't want to be in a relationship, she doesn't want to stay married, or she just, and I'll never forget it. It was August 4th or 8th. I refer to it as the make or break meeting. We had people. So she had, or she has, I really don't know. But back then she had two brothers. She was the third, or the first girl. Her eldest brother actually went to, schoolmates with my elder brother. It was a small city, so you knew the person or whatever. And the eldest brother was sound. He didn't tolerate nonsense. But the younger one, the second one, was a lawyer. Who just lived in a bubble. He lived in fantasy world, and because the parents were not around, they were supposed to send someone. So they actually sent. The dad called his cousin, and the cousin said he wouldn't go because when she accused me of me being the one who had infected her, he was also at the meeting. And I can recall that after that meeting, he told me, he said, "Hey, my son, what I'm hearing is unbelievable, And that he had spoken to her dad, and the dad said, she has anger issues, and he said, I don't understand what he was talking about. And he told me, he said, listen, that this is the first time I was hearing this parable proverb. He said, when you have a bucket that's leaking, no matter where you keep it, it's still gonna leak. Even if you hang it from the ceiling, it's still gonna leak. And he told me, he said, if not that we're Christians. Yeah, so this is a Christian, he was a businessman, he had a gas station. And he knew us really well. But getting to know what was really going on was shocking to him. And I remember him telling me, he said, my son, if not that we're Christians, if we went back to the village, that's going traditional now, if we went back to the village, that she wouldn't come out alive. I said, but we can't do that. But I know that if we went back to the village, she wouldn't come out alive based on what she had done and all that. And then he said, whatever you're doing, you have my support 100%. And so when the make or break meeting happened in the hotel I was staying in, it was just convenient. I got a suite, and then my parents were there. And then instead of her folks to send the first son, who was much more responsible, they sent the second one, who was a lawyer, because they felt that the daughter was doing right and they needed, I don't know what they were thinking really, I don't know what they're thinking, sending him, because he was a lawyer. Anyway, so this is how it played out. People from the church, people from both families, and she came in, all glammed up as usual. And, when I started talking, and the brother said something like, well, if they can't stay together, then they should, each person what's the word he used? Whatever furniture anybody has, the person can go with it. And I'm like, this guy must be a really jerk. She's not spent a kobo. Everything in the house, I bought it. And so, but the funny thing was, the lady who had, who it took a while to convince, now she was convinced. And so had wanted to present the lotions, from different hotels, and the because I'd not told anyone about the emails that I had backtracked and checked and found out that they were false. And so I wanted to present it, and the lady said, no, 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 don't do it here. And so God, they'll ask her a question, as usual, she would, lie. And and then they narrowed it down and said, you usually go on training. She said, yes, yes, yes. And I said, who's doing these trainings? And she said, it's something she does regularly. And I said, okay, who allows you to go for these trainings? And she said, my supervisor. And said, okay, can you call the supervisor? Um, so I guess she wasn't expecting that. And so, as usual, she called. Excuse me. As usual, she called the chap up. And then the guy picked. She said, um, uh, said, I'm here about the training. And so they said, so even her own brother said, shut up. Shut up. That's not what we asked you to do. And so they put the phone on speaker and they were asking the chap who said, can you confirm if she goes on trainings, if she's designated to go for trainings every 2 weeks? Because the lady had set up, she wasn't a lawyer, she was an administrative staff, but she went about it like a trained lawyer. She actually set a trap. And she said, so she was asking her stuff. She said, you travel a lot, right? She said, yes. So why do you travel? She said, training, company training. She said, okay, your company sends you on training. She said, yes. Okay, so who gives the go ahead? She said her supervisor. She said, okay, so if you call the supervisor now, he can confirm, he can attest to that. She said, yes. And so she did that. She pulled the stunt, and the brother said, shut up. What are you doing? And so they asked the poor chap. This guy didn't know what was happening, but he knew there were people around because he could hear voices. People were upset and all that. And they asked him, the trainings, and he said he doesn't know anything about trainings. And at that point, her brother started crying. Uh, her brother started crying, and in my mind, I'm like, you're just a buffoon. Now you're crying. But all the time she used to come to your city and she would show up at your house with a man. You didn't think it was right. You didn't think it was something that you should get into. In fact, it was so bad that she would show up at his house with a man. He had the home, but she wouldn't stay with him. She would show up at his house with a man and actually carry him, take him around town. It's just crazy. Anyway, so when they found out that the whole training thing was a facade, was a lie, that was when he knew how bad it was, because he knew his sister. I think the parents sent him there thinking that he could. I really don't know what they were thinking. It would have made more sense for the eldest brother to be there, because I knew him to be responsible and sensible, but not the second one. But when they finally found out that her trainings were all lies and that she had just been messing around, he started crying. And I'm like, what are you crying for? And so my dad asked and said, no, the brother before then, brother kept on asking me, do I want to continue with this? And I said, why you asking me? It's both of us. Ask her too if she wants to continue with this. And so after everything had been laid out, and it was clear, it was clear, it was clear cut and dried, that she had just been bad. And so my dad said, he thinks we need to take a break, think things through. At this point, he thinks we both need to take a break. And each person should go about their stuff, and we should think about it. And for one, I don't like people making decisions for me. Um, so it was the first time hearing that. And so I excused myself to go into the bedroom, and my mom followed me. She was on my heels. And she was like, don't agree to peace talk or whatever. Don't agree to reconciliation. This is not right. This is really bad. But I already knew. So when I came out, I said, yeah, want to take, yeah, let's take a break. Um, this meeting lasted for hours. Um, and so that was my decision. I wasn't living in the house anymore. So she could keep it. Um, and then the brother was crying, and they came with someone else. I can't recall. You know, and so they had to drive back to the city, and I went to my room. Um, it was August 8th, 2010. And while I was trying to sleep, around midnight, I heard someone knocking on my door, and I'm like, who's knocking on my door? I don't, staying in a hotel, I'm not expecting anybody. I don't do women and all that. So I was like, who be knocking on my door? But one thing I do usually when I come to a place, like a hotel, I want, that's what, because, by God's grace, I was able to, I spent the year after I graduated from university working with my friend, and they were into hotel in business, so I knew a little bit about that. And so, when I stay in hotels, like, I try to be nice to the receptionist, because most people just go past them. Try to be nice to be the receptionist. And so the lady who had given me my room had, you know, had her own experience. I think she messed up too, and her partner drove her out. Um, and so she kind of pieced two and two together. Everybody coming for a meeting, and then people leaving crying and all. She kind of pieced it together. Like I said, women have this thing about bonding together, regardless of what the situation is. Most women do. And so around midnight, I had someone knock on my door, and I'm like, who's this? So I said, who's that? And she said, and I heard, it's me. It was my ex's voice. Mind you, they had traveled, so I was like, number one, how did you even know where I was? Number two, you traveled. How did you get back so soon? Number three, how did you even get to know my room number? And so she said, it's me. I don't call her name, but she'll know. I hope she gets this. Um, and she said, I'm here to apologize, and I'm like, this is just crap. So well, you need to go back, because I'm already in bed. I'm not opening the door. And she said, I'm going to stay out here until, I want to apologize. And I was thinking, in the past 3 years, 4 years, you never apologized once. Now that you've been caught, you want to apologize. But one thing I used to do back then, and I still do today, is WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I remembered the story of the lady who was caught in adultery. Adultery takes two people, but they brought only the woman, and they wanted to stone her. And I always used to ask myself, especially when I was faced with really really a tough situation, I would ask myself, what would Jesus do? And so I said, well, Jesus is merciful. I mean, that's why he kept me, delivered me, kept me secure from HIV, myself and my daughter. And so I kind of considered, because I didn't want someone coming out and saying hi in the hallway, knocking on my door and all that. So I opened the door. Yes, what is it? Please, she wants to talk to me. She wants to apologize. I said, there's nothing to apologize for. I said, by the way, why are you here? You're supposed to be somewhere else. She came about, she's finally realized, it was just a bunch of baloney. Anyway, so she comes in, and she says, she's been thinking. So this was in the space of hours, from somebody who came all glammed up, ready to disprove and lie her way through. It was what broke her was the emails that I had sent. So that was signed, sealed, delivered. She couldn't even explain that. I don't know why my bed is looking funny. I guess I'm feeling funny today anyway. Um, so I let her into the room, and there was a couch, and I said, "You can take the bed. I'll sleep on the couch or something." And she said, um, yeah, she wants to apologize. Um, she has she has found she has found she has found Christianity again. It was just a bunch of BS. Um, Please, she's really sorry and all that and all that and all that. So I said, yeah, I mean, you can sleep on the bed and all that. And I was trying to sleep, and then suddenly she was praying, giving me the impression that, oh yeah, she had messed up, but now she was trying to do good. And I remember asking her, because everything I had gotten on her, photographs, emails, all that, I had backed it on my laptop and on an external hard drive. And I had asked her, I said, okay, if we're going to work on this together, what do you want me to do with all this stuff? And she said, yeah, let's keep it for my daughter when she grows up. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so the next day I had to go to work, and I left her in the room. By the time I got back, by the time I got back home that night, my laptop had crashed. What I found out was that she was trying to erase every proof, and she had called the IT specialist at the company she worked with, the job I'd given her, and he asked for information. He was trying to break into my laptop, and he couldn't. And he said, "Well, I can't. I really can't break into. I can't get into the laptop." And he said, "What you can do is you can just fry it." I saw exactly what she did. So when I go back and I opened the laptop, it was dead. I said, "What happened?" And she said, "You know what? The guy came in, housekeeping came in, and as he was cleaning the room, the laptop fell into the bucket." So by this time, I had I had people who were able to get me, extract data from her phone. Um, I mean, she had several lines. She had lines that I didn't even know existed. And so it wasn't just her saying stuff. I could confirm. I could tell who she had been speaking with, and text messages and all that. So that's how I knew she was talking with trying to get into my laptop and all that. So you know, but the major thing, and I think that's where I got it wrong, was um, um, my daughter one day just asked, where's daddy, where's mommy? And I tried to explain to her. She was just 4 then. And I tried to explain to her, and I just told myself, I didn't know anything about co-parenting. I didn't know about. I was still, I thought it was salvageable, but after the meeting, I knew it wasn't salvageable. And so when my daughter asked that, I was like, yeah, I can't deprive her of seeing her mother. That's something I can't change. She's her mother. Should always be her mother. Um, so that also influenced my thinking, and so I said, okay, let's give it another shot. So this was 2010. At the end of the year, I knew it wasn't, she hadn't changed at all. Um, and then the next year, I went fully into real estate, and went with my daughter. Somehow she tagged along for the trip, to Dubai, and you know, I really didn't even know what her role was then, because she wasn't my wife, she wasn't my partner, she wasn't my friend, she wasn't anything. And I talk about friends. She asked me, please can we be friends? Even though we're going, we're calling this quits. I said no, we can't be friends. I can't be friends with a liar, you know. And like I said, she wasn't working, she wasn't working in the same city as we were, and I had just like I said, we're relocating, and so I was packing up stuff, and I was packing her stuff up, and the amount of stuff I saw hidden in her things were just horrible. She had nude photographs. I mean, printouts. She had selfies. I saw her I saw her O levels. She didn't even have up to 5 credits. So I don't know how she got into the university. Then I saw a couple of her results, and they were bad. It was all E, F, 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 and I'm like, there's no way someone with this result to be able to graduate in the next 2 years. You know. And then also I found a stash of hospital stationery with a stamp and a stamp pad. And so what she would do was she would, send in a sick report, and she would disappear. But she would tell me she was going to work. And in addition, I also found a letter where she had been suspended for 2 weeks, but she had been going to work all that while. Anyway, so she had moved. So I packed up her stuff and I sent it to her. You know, so when we relocated, I knew, it was just, you know, it wasn't salvageable. Um, and then I I got hit with dystonia, because it's very rare, and it's incurable. People really didn't know much about it. So I spent 2 years chasing a diagnosis. Um, and because I was chasing a diagnosis, I really couldn't be carrying my kid around, because I wanted her to get to be in a stable environment. So I left her with my folks. But I had told them that if she did come around, they could allow her to see, visits, but not go with her. Um, yeah, man. Yeah. So while I was out there chasing the diagnoses, she went. And I use this word, but people say, how can a parent abduct? Yeah, parents abduct their kids. And so I received a call. This time I was in the UK. I received a call from my cousin, and he told me, something bad had happened. I said, what? And he told me that she came to the house. She came to my parents' house with a policeman. Now we're talking about West Africa, so corruption is endemic. And she didn't even come with the cops. She just sent them, and they stormed the house fully armed, in between 5 and 6. Um, from what I was told, my parents were trying to go for morning mass. I said I was raised Catholic. They were trying to go for morning mass, only for them to see a truck load of armed men. And my mom thought they were thieves. And I'm grateful, because that experience alone. I mean, I've confronted armed robbers. Really, I have. But it's me. You have to be careful when you're doing stuff. I mean, I've had law enforcement training and all that. You know, but thankfully, none of my parents, passed out. This armed policeman stormed into the house and took my daughter in her pajamas. I didn't get to see my daughter for 3 years. You know, I knew the city she was in, but I didn't know where she was. And all I could do was just pray. And so at that point, I initiated divorce proceedings, and my dad, my parents had called my dad and my mom, and said, leave this divorce thing and focus on your health, and leave looking for your daughter. And I think that was one of the first times, I had a quarrel. I had a verbal. No, I had a quarrel with my dad because he was saying, let go, just leave her. When your daughter is grown, she'll look for you. I told him, I said, don't tell me that. If you tell me that again, that will be the last time you call me your son, and I'll call you dad. Don't tell me that, because I knew that if she had stayed with her, she would just turn her into, a lady of the streets. So for 3 years, I just, I didn't know where they were. And mind you, I was living in the UK then, and I recall, a phone call that, um, one of her managers her supervisor had made to me, and he started off by saying, "So how is India?" I said, "I'm not in India." He said, "Your wife said, she took you to India." I mean, that's just another example of who she was. Your wife said she took you to India. She took a month off. I said, "No, she's not with me. We're done." He said, "You never went to India." I said, "No." But I mean, that was left for them to deal with. Um, but just to conclude that, um, I filed for divorce, um, and not once did she show up. She just kept changing lawyers, because what would happen to these poor guys is they would come thinking, "Oh yeah, this is the case we can win," and by the time you know they saw the information and the evidence, they refused to represent her. And I would fly, I'll fly from the UK. Yeah, I think I shared this, one of the videos. I'll fly from London to Nigeria just to attend court. So you can imagine how much I was spending just doing that. I wanted to do it right. So she didn't show up once, and finally it was annulled. And one of the things they found out, or my attorney found out, was that the so back then when you get married, you're supposed to go file it at the registry or something. So she had, because I specifically requested that I wanted a female attorney. So I spoke to my solicitor, and she got me a female attorney. And this lady went to the registry to pull up to see if she could get a copy of the marriage certificate. And we found out that it was doctored. And so what basically had been happening was that the church her parents were attending, the what do they call them? The GO, General Overseer, the founder, was from that state, so he had some clout, and so he was issuing out government government certificates or government licenses from the church. You know, so that was how we found out that it wasn't even registered. Because the way it works is, if it had been registered, it would have been a statutory marriage. That would have been going to a high court. But because it wasn't registered, it was now more or less a magistrate thing. It was what they call them, what they call these courts, uh, district courts or something. I don't know. Um, Went through. Flew in. I was in Nigeria. I think I flew in for court 5 or 6 times. I remember I was business class, and then I would stay in a hotel because I didn't want to stay in my parents' home. I didn't want people knowing I was around and all that, because this had already started. I didn't want people coming in and then asking me what's going on and all that. So every time I returned, I would stay in a hotel. My folks would come and spend some time with me and all that. You know, so she never did show up for any of the court hearings. And well, what she did was that she now went and she filed she went to the high court and she filed the same thing, which is not double jeopardy, but that's duplicity. You can't do that. So I had to get a lawyer for that one and all that. It was just messy. Anyway, after 3 years, I told myself, because when I make up my mind, it's really difficult to change it, because I try to look at it from every perspective. And so in 20 I think it was in 2014 or 2013, I told myself, okay, I'm gonna go get my daughter. I don't care how much it takes, because there are two things I'm good at doing. I believe that I'm good at doing. One, I'm good at tracking people, even though it's expensive. You need money, and then I think I'm good. Pretty good at speaking, at communicating, and so I went back to look for her. And honestly, I wanted to hurt her. Honestly, I wanted to hurt her brother. For stomaching all this nonsense. But some of the whole thing was that God intervened, and I couldn't. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. And I got the police involved. Now, mind you, I was a police officer, so they accorded that respect. And so when I told them, they just told me, boss, just give us the address, we'll go there. But I didn't want to do that. I grew up on the streets of Warrior. I wanted to do my own thing. I was like, God, forgive me. But that's how hurt I was, because it wasn't just about her. She was not endangering the life of my daughter. And so I make that trip. I don't tell anybody I'm coming. I don't tell my solicitor. I tell nobody, because I was going to wreak havoc, really. I want to take the law into my hands, really. And so we were able, talk to people in telecommunications. They were able to triangulate, an area she stayed in. And so I remember going there and just, asking questions, until finally I was directed to where they lived. But then when I got there, again, something told me, don't go there. So I just went across to the gate man across them. And I said, hey, I'm looking for this lady. I described him. And he said, oh yeah, that they were no longer there, that they traveled. But it was so bad that the security man thought that the babysitter then was my daughter's mom. That's just to tell you how absent she was. And so when I got there, they were not there. And so I asked, so after that, I just asked him. I said, do you know the school my daughter attends? He said yes. So he told me the name of the school, or the way it was. It was a Catholic school. So I remember going there with my police orderly, and we plan things, but God is the one who presides. Unfortunately, he was supposed to have come in casual clothing, but he went with his uniform. And so when he got there, my point wasn't to pick up my daughter from school. My point was to find out where they stayed, so that I could pay them a visit later in the night. But he got there with his uniform, and then evoked some curiosity, and then the school went into kind of a lockdown. And so I had to come out because I realized things weren't going the way it was supposed to. So I came out, and I had to walk 2 flights of steps, 2 flights of steps. And I recall getting there, and a small boy, a young kid, rolling to me and saying, "Are you looking for Aretha? Are you looking for?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, yeah, this is her class." He went there and he said, "Oh, she's not here." Um, so apparently they had smuggled her into the principal's office. It was just bad. By the end of the day, I was able to get her to Syria, because the moment my ex found out I was in country, she came to my hotel. Now this was somebody who in the past, when I would come to the country and say I want to see my daughter, she would tell me, you should have given me 2 weeks notice and all that. So um yeah, I recall this little boy saying, "You looking for Harriet?" I said yes, and he went there and said that she's not here anymore. And so the funny thing was, her mother wasn't even around, so she spent the night in the convent, which is just crazy. Those are the things that were really annoying me. And the lady said she wanted to see both of us, and so I went there with all the things I had gotten for her over the years, and we had a meeting. And before I left, the principal looked at me and called me and said, um, "I don't know you. But if anything happens to this lady, I know it's you. So please, whatever you have in mind, don't do it." Yeah. So that was actually what saved her. But the summary was that I finally got my daughter after 3 years. And she's just blossoming into something really great. So the bottom line is perseverance. Persevere. That which the Bible says, "I and they that the Lord has given me were made for signs and wonders." As parents, we're actually caretakers. We just need to do our bit. And it took a while for her to adjust. But the moment she adjusted, she was up and running, and she's still doing that till today. Um, as for the mother, the last I heard about her was, in addition to HIV, she had breast cancer too. She actually had a double mastectomy. And I remember asking myself, why wouldn't she understand that there's something at play here that's not is not human. I Yes, we don't ask for diseases or illnesses, like, I didn't choose to have dystonia. But for you to have HIV and then have breast cancer on top, in addition, was just weird. Um, yeah, so that's it. Really, I can't be thankful to God enough for keeping my daughter, because I know when she came, she started opening up to me, and she was telling me how she had become a street urchin, and how her mother would bring men to the house and leave her with the men, and they would try just doing weird stuff. But all that's in the past. That's all that's in the past. And so what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. And I think that's also something that has built resilience in my daughter. Um, and people tell me, "Hey, you've done it. You did a great job," and all that. And I tell them, really, it's God. It's not me. It's not me. It's God. Yeah. That's how the first one ended. And the beautiful thing again is, from the mess of that situation, something beautiful was birthed, and I can look at it today. She's like my North Star. Times when I feel bad, And so that's what I would say right now. If you're in a situation with someone and things are not working out, you need to prioritize, okay? The children's safety first. Best if you don't even have children, because once children come into the mix, then it's more, it's messier. Or if you can get along, just walk, just take a walk. Because I can't even begin to recount the number of times I was assaulted, by her, and but I just didn't let that dissuade me. Um, I used to tell myself back then that even if, and I'll tell God this, I said, even if you don't let me find her, when she's grown and she comes looking for me, I want to be able to look her in the eyes and tell her I did everything a father could do. That was what kept on driving me, until I got her, and since then it's just been remarkable. So when it comes to relationships, especially marital relationships, what's bad is bad. What's black is black. It doesn't matter. Just be bold enough to call things out. But remember, once kids come in, their priority first. You guys can go sort yourself out. But ensure your kids that are in a good place, in a stable environment. And for parents who understand what parenting is about, you need to roll up your sleeves, okay? Because single parenting is it's not a walk in the park. It's not a walk in the park. So yeah, so that really ends. There's a lot now. I understand. Now I understand why when novels are adapted to screenplays. Uh, if you've read the novel, you realize that there's some things they didn't capture because there's a whole lot. Yeah, there's a whole lot that I didn't mention. But that's how the first one ended, and like I said, actually a couple of years ago, I picked up the phone and I called her, just to let myself know, just to prove to myself that I still didn't have any anger towards her. And she was shocked I called her. And I said, "Hope you're taking your ART drugs." Of course, she came up with another story of how, she's now a science miracle because they don't understand how she's doing chemo and yet taking HIV drugs. Um, Yeah, but I called her, and then immediately I called her. She sent what very long, lengthy text asking for apology and all that. I didn't respond. There's no point in responding. You know, all I'm saying is, as the parents, realize that we're just caretakers. We need to do the best for our kids. And that involves sacrifice. It involves a lot of compromise. It involves a lot. And if you're not ready to do that, then don't get involved. Don't get involved. Don't, because you're bringing these kids into an environment that's not going to nurture them. Why would you do that? And if things are not working well, if you can have a conversation with your partner where you can talk as adults, then just do the right thing. Go to court. It's expensive, but do the right thing. Remember that we're there to ensure that our children become better versions than us. And my dad used to say this, that the man is a failure. No matter how much he's succeeded outside, he's a failure if his children are not good. You know. And so, thank you for staying this long. And I hope you have questions, comments. You could drop it there. I hope this talks to someone. I know a chap, Lani, he's been fighting custody for almost 9 years now. Unfortunately, his ex's parents are wealthy, but I'm grateful that I got mine. And so just remember that God's not done with you. Okay? See you in the next video. Bye.